can't tell yet. Do we have Matt in the house yet? Are you hanging out, Matt?
I'm sneaking around back here.
Oh, there you are. I can see you now. Cool. All right. Okay, so Daver, if you wouldn't mind, start the recording. Are we good, Sir Dave? Okay, cool, cool. All right, you guys. Today is St. Patty's Day. I've got my stout right beside my side here. I'm drinking a nice beer that was given to me by my team for my birthday. And I'm doing the Dragon's Milk, Dave. It's really good. So,
Happy
cheers to
birthday.
everybody. Uh, yeah, it's really good.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. As they say, as you get older, it's like just thankful for the next one.
Happy birthday.
Thanks. Um, so what we've got cooking here today is I was talking with Matt today, and he's been doing quite a bit in the climate arena related to IOTA. And also, we had some pretty meaningful discussions in the governance world, getting ready for what we hope to be as a successful build versus burn vote for the Treasury. And I've asked Deep Sea or JD to kind of present something which we're kind of coining the Community Bridge Fund, or the I call it the Speed Fund because we're trying to do everything fast. But Matt, I'd like to give you the floor, and maybe you can kind of just give us an overview of a little education and a little bit of overview of what you've been doing, because I think everybody in the Americas always hears about Matt doing cool stuff, but we never really get to see it or know about it. So I'd love to have you kind of just talk us through that.
Yeah, I've learned that my position is kind of a misnomer because I'm a little bit. I don't want to say I'm all over the place, but a lot of times when it comes to interfacing with public and private companies, I end up being the guy in many respects, to where when it comes to them understanding their problems and how we can use the technology to fix them, a lot of people seem to try to pull me into the conversation, and it works out fine. I don't have any issues with it. But it seems to be one of my strengths to be able to get to the problem quickly with private and public companies, and particularly big companies. Get into the executive leadership circles relatively easily because of my agency and government background and all that kind of stuff, and then really understand what their problems are and how we can use IOTA to solve them. So I've bounced around from a few different things for those of you who haven't followed kind of my roles at the foundation. But when I originally came to the foundation, I started talking with Dom and David and all them back then in 2017. Started working with them in November and December, right when we were, substantiated as a foundation on the side. And then in May, I made the jump and came over to the foundation full time. And when I came in as a security specialist because I've got 10 years of cybersecurity experience at the NSA and various U.S. agencies doing some fun stuff there. And started working on our auto peering mechanisms, which has grown into the reputation system that we now have. And went into the public sector, did some smart city stuff, took over mobility for Ann once he left. And on top of that, I've done a lot with other infrastructure projects, managed the relationships with Dell and Intel, and a number of others, and now with Google, Gold Standard, and others as well, thanks to the climate work we're doing. So there's a lot that I've been able to touch on and help build out the frameworks teams and the streams and identity stuff, help write out the initial white paper for identity and things of that nature too. So I'm pretty multi-talented, but with the sustainability stuff, that has been one of the fastest growing spaces we've seen over the last 2 years, and it just aligns so well with the capabilities that our technology has from the IOTA perspective because of the energy efficiency, the near real-time like capabilities, the data versus value structures, and it works out really well for government acceptance too, because climate data is a big problem that no one's really been able to solve because no one wants anyone to own the data. So when you're talking about like permissionless data systems, it just makes sense. Like governments are like, oh yeah, we need a trust layer for this so that we can trust the companies, we can trust the data that's coming from them, we can trust the footprint and the emissions that are being calculated and measured and reported and audited and all these other things. But then we can also build incentives into it. So I guess that's kind of a quick overview to just say like I've done a lot of things, but this is the area that I have seen the most rapid increase, the most rapid acknowledgement of permissionless capabilities, and the highest potential when it comes to what IOTA is able to do and how differentiated we are as a technology. So I'll kind of stop there for some immediate questions if you'll have any.
That was smooth. Got to say, that sounded pretty good.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, anybody have any questions? I'm kind of, Matt's been talking a little bit about this climate stuff, so I'd like to hear about that. But did anybody want to talk about anything that he covered, maybe before he dives into the next?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about this stuff for like 4 hours. so I just want to make sure like I'm talking about it in the way that's the most useful for y'all, and providing some good insights for you.
Well, I think what you did was really good there. Why don't we just kind of go into some of the climate stuff that you were sharing with me earlier, and just talk
I
about the
have
whole
one
subject?
question.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Hello, hello everybody. Hi Matt.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, good. Is there any initiatives around carbon credits and
Absolutely.
carbon credit markets? Could you maybe expand on that?
Yeah, so we published a white paper on the Climate Check website in I want to say November during COP26, and that's the UN's big annual like climate conference essentially. And we have entered into what we're calling open collaborations, and we're progressing towards a strategic partnership with Gold Standard. And if you're not familiar with the climate space, there's really two big carbon registries, and it's Gold Standard and Verra. Gold Standard is looked at as a really high quality, like a high level of trust. They have about 25 to 30% of the carbon markets, from my understanding, that comes down into their system to certify and produce new carbon credits. And then Verra is the other one, which is larger, but they have different structure to how it's done. So the market's like super fragmented, which is honestly good for permissionless technologies to come in and kind of connect the space. But I've been working on what we're calling DMRV for about the past 2 years as one of my main projects. And essentially what that is when a carbon credit is made, it's issued based on offsets that have been obtained and that can be verified. So what an offset is, as an example, is if you have a landfill and it's producing methane, that methane is naturally going into the atmosphere. And if you can capture that methane and stop it from entering the atmosphere by burning it off or using it for energy or other things, then you have what's known as an emissions reduction, and that emissions reduction gets audited. Typically, this is a manual process. Someone goes to the facility, they look at all the books, all the paperwork. They're there for a few weeks. They verify all the different devices are working. They take measurements. They write up a report. They submit it. It goes into one of these carbon registries, and then that facility or the owner of that facility can then obtain carbon credits for those emissions reductions. So it's a really heavy, slow process. And what we've done, and it's really different in the space than like ClimateDAO or some of the others that you're seeing, is we went bottom up from this because of the data capabilities, the energy footprint that we have, and just the ability to take blockchain and implement it almost directly in the sensors. So that the data is actually being transferred through the Tangle. It's being structured in streams in these different types of facilities, and then it's going into a report in an automated fashion. So there's a really high level of trust in this data now. And so Gold Standard has come in to work with us on this, and Google has provided a $1 million grant fund for us to build out the open collaboration, so that data can come into the registry process, get certified, and then actually be part of issuing new carbon credits.
Again, stellar explanation. Nicely done.
It's well rehearsed.
Yeah, I could tell. I could tell. It's
I
definitely
talked to a
nailed it.
lot of companies about this now, so it's like 90% of my time now because there's so much demand for it.
And are you looking to add smart contracts to it, or you already done it?
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's actually where the Google funding and the gold standard relationship comes into play. Right now, we're working on structuring out the necessary like secretariat level to manage what this looks like in an open fashion. That's why we're calling it open collaboration, because us and Gold Standard and Climate Check are going to start to establish like what smart contracts look like for automated issuance of carbon credits, as long as you have the right things that can be verified. So the carbon credit process is going to go into a smart contracting framework, and it's not going to be for buying carbon credits and then having a one-to-one token, but tokenizing the production of carbon credits from the bottom up.
Cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
this is a huge market that I think grew 180% in the last year, and this is just the voluntary market that's grown 180%. There's what's known as the compliance market, which is an involuntary market, which is 100 times bigger as well.
Yep.
And are you able to kind of create a network that is kind of like that you can apply these type of carbon credit capturing things across a variety of devices, so that if you're doing like if you're working, let's say, with a data stream that is I don't know, like that requires some type of manual process to become useful, are you able to apply it into those settings, or do you have to use kind of
Yeah.
direct from the devices themselves?
Yeah, we can apply it in manual settings too. So our first pilot was a landfill gas facility. It was funded by the Canadian government. It has oversight from the Chilean government in South America. And that one was fully sensor driven. So every data set or every data point that we had was pulled directly from a sensor. We had a node that was in the facility that took the data, put it into a transaction, put it into the streams framework, and then issued the transactions over the Tangle. And then we have a methodology, as they're known, which there's 1,000 different methodologies out there for climate action, carbon credits, and other types of initiatives, but they're all manual right now. The digitization process of them is extremely limited, and all the auditing, reporting, and verification is all manual as well. For the most part, I'd say probably like 98% manual for the most part. So we did it originally with sensors in the first facility, but then we got a secondary funding amount from the Canadian government to go into like essentially an industrial composting facility. And that one has manual data points and automated data points.
Perfect. Okay. And then, is there like is there a framework that can be used, and like where is it? Like how can we take these learnings and scale it?
Yeah, so that's where the Google stuff comes into play, because we're going to start to open up these frameworks now that we've gotten gone through the government like auditing and review process. We're going to be doing a demonstration on these next month to the Chilean and Canadian government to get them through the next phase. And then with Gold Standard, we're going to start to issue out like a transition of physical to digital processing and a new guide on how to go into these digital capabilities. And then another guide on going from digital capabilities to automated methodologies and frameworks. So all of this is going to be built out this year, coded, open source, so that the entire climate ecosystem can start to agree on how this should progress, and we can accelerate the industry as a whole.
Super exciting.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and we've gotten really good feedback from World Bank and the UN and a number of different like UN bodies, UNEP, UNCCC, and quite a few others too, that have looked at this and said this is something that makes sense. It makes sense because it provides enough transparency and oversight to where the trust equation is starting to be solved, and then it helps scale the industry, because there's no way the industry can actually satisfy the climate like goals for 2030 with the amount of manpower that is in there, it has to be scaled up in a completely new digital transformation. So everyone's been really, really optimistic and excited about the kind of developments we're building here.
What are the biggest challenges you're facing right now?
The biggest challenge is the setup. So like there's two parts. One, the methodologies. There's over 1,000 different methodologies out there, but translating them from digital or from manual methodologies into digitally native methodologies, there's a lot of heavy lifting there. So we want to try to streamline that soon, so we can start to have like essentially an EIP or a TIP process where you can submit a digital version of an existing methodology for like community voting, and then the climate ecosystem can essentially come in and start to vote and approve on digital methodologies as well, so that the industry can scale. But then the other hard part is finding people with the technical competence to install these things on site, because sometimes like you get the server down there, you get the edge gateway or the node structure down there on a micro PC, and these guys are industrial IoT guys. They're not super well versed computer science program type of guys like we are. So getting it into the facility, setting it up, and making sure it's all right is really difficult. We think we may have been able to like bridge this problem though, because Dell and Intel and Data have started to come in and work with us and incorporate Project Alvarium and the data confidence fabrics into the climate solutions. So Dell is now providing us hardware. They have a team at the CTO level that's helping us develop and test these things. And then Data is using their cloud-based open source platform to deploy updates to these devices, so that we don't have to have on-site technical assistance as much. So we're hoping that this really starts to solve the problems, but like getting the devices up and running is the really hard part, and then scaling these methodologies into digitization is going to be the other barrier or hard point.
And to deploy these devices, is there a specific skill set that you can identify that currently the people that say working at the compost site don't have, but it's like something that say a person who has a background in XYZ might be able to understand? So you can think
Yeah, I mean,
about
just like a basic like system administrator or network administrator skill set is perfectly fine for being able to like go out to these sites and put them together. But when you're working in some of the countries that we're working with, like Chile and Argentina, and we're talking to like countries throughout Africa about installing this and scaling it at a very large level, they don't have people that have that level of like just DevOps background in general to be able to set this up, troubleshoot it on site. They need assistance and someone kind of looking over their shoulder to help them sort through the problems.
thank you, that's good.
I think I think what you're thinking, right? So Andy, for example, is a Pepsi bottler, yeah? So they have technical staff to implement vending machines and refrigeration systems and so on, right? So if you could leverage hordes of people that these bottlers, for example, have to, for example, bring refrigeration, HVAC systems, and so on online. That's what the background of
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure those kind of like edge focused but still semi-technical like mindset people, if there was a simple like SOP or a lightweight certification, like they go to this course for 2 weeks, they test it out in different environments, and they learn how to set up and take down these things, I'm sure that could scale into those kind of like workforces really efficiently.
Yeah, I wonder if there's there's a bunch of companies that provide like training materials across kind of the Pepsi and Dr. Pepper network. So I'm wondering if we could pair with some in a group like that and have them do some training, and we kind of mass train a bunch of service techs to learn something, or even actually think about doing kind of lower staff like merchandisers who kind of need to be upskilled anyway, and this could be a simplified avenue for upskilling.
Yeah, no, I think that's both of those are good options, because just finding people that are already like wanting to work out in the field and be in those environments, and just starting to upskill them a little bit with semi-technical but not overly complicated skill sets like this, I think that would be a good way to start to address the problem.
This is so all approaches are needed in this case. I would say it all depends upon the environment in which the sensors live, right? And where they're getting the where they're trying to retrieve the data, and that's going to kind of dictate the skill set that you need, and also the deployment methods in which you can employ in an optimal way for whatever the setting is, right? So I could envision something like Armis or Palo Alto Networks or somebody like that actually being used to be actually push this stuff out to the sensors from a centralized kind of web console aspect, and that would actually allow you to deal with a one-to-many thing a lot easier.
Yeah, that's
But
what the
again,
data guys are doing too.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's really helpful to have that kind of like cloud-based deployment or zero-touch deployment like method.
Right. But that only works if you know if you own the infrastructure all the way to the end, or you should have device profiles for all those different devices, and that's where Armis could actually do a really good job with, and I can help you with the intros there. But the other thing that's really interesting here is I've been involved with so many deployments like this. The politics that you run into, and the environments that you run into. A lot of times it's not the technologies that's the halter, it's the people that are in charge of the networks and in charge of the devices themselves that actually can basically delay projects from being deployed if they don't feel comfortable with the solution. So there's a lot of blocking that happens in these things. Either one, because
there's a lot of education because these are getting integrated into SCADA systems, which are essentially the same type of systems that manage our energy infrastructure and our water infrastructure and stuff like that. So the good thing is these are like read-only systems. They're very non-intrusive when you're integrating them into this. They're just pulling a little bit of data, they're securing it, they're being very specific about it. So that helps alleviate that conversation a lot when people know, like, oh, you're not introducing new vulnerabilities to my network, or you're not pulling things that are my business IP or what have you.
Or I'm barely keeping this place alive, and I don't like this. Can't break it, right? I'm already I'm not even comfortable with my situation already with keeping it stable, right? Like finally got it to where I want it to be. I don't want it to be messed with, right? So that's actually a lot of stuff.
I mean, that's where the Dell relationship comes in too, because they're supplying edge servers that they're installing IOTA and Alvarium and these climate structures in their edge servers from the Dell factory, and they're shipping them out to these facilities for us.
Cool.
So the level of like relationship we have there has been really, really supportive, and us being able to go to these facilities and say, hey, you don't need to pay for the hardware. It's covered by this government grant. We're just deploying it out. We just need someone to plug it up, make sure it connects to the internet, and we can take it from there.
So you used a term just before to explain to like lower the comfort level to a local administrator who might not have the bandwidth or kind of what did you say?
Which part?
Yeah, which one of us?
Sorry, Matt. Sorry, okay. Matt. You said something like this is what you say to lower the.
Yeah, he talked about like a cloud-based deployment and Sedena, right? He's one of the partners in this like little consortium. I think that's what he means.
Yeah, the partners are growing, but the thing that helps get them comfortable is understanding that we're not coming in and introducing no more vulnerabilities. We're not coming in and doing like a massive amount of data collection. It's very selective, and it's not coming in and interfering with any of the existing systems. It's just an extra plug-in that pulls an extra data stream out. It's very simple. It's very non-invasive, so it helps them understand like the risk is really low, and the benefit is high because you can take facilities or landfills or things that are really a money sink essentially, and then with this new data structuring capability, you can start to tie these into carbon markets, and then they have another revenue stream. So you're bringing them money, you're bringing them a solution to a problem, and you're helping highlight the impact that they can make on the environment. And then this impact and this understanding goes into huge like green bond conversations now. ESG investors now have an understanding of like, if they put money into this versus this, what makes the most impact for my dollar. So there's a lot of like really good understanding about how we can start to address these big climate problems, and it seems like for the most, in almost every conversation I've had, every party starts to click really well and understand that this is a problem solver, and everyone's pretty happy with the direction that it's gone.
Yeah.
We haven't seen a lot of resistance once they understand what we're doing.
And I would think that you have a conversation at the sea level, and you tie the financial picture and the so you have a financial gain, right, with carbon credits, and then you also have the potential PR sale as well, looking which is a positive, right? So you get a double whammy there as far as good PR, helping the environment, and also helping the bottom line. And if you get any pushback at the at the lower levels, where the guys who have to do the work to actually get it implemented, that sea level push down will actually overcome that.
So can
yeah, and then with the regulators.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So could we directly interface into the system to buy directly carbon credits via a token on the IOTA Tango?
At some point, yeah, that's the goal. We want to start to connect these different kind of carbon markets from the bottom up, so that you can start looking at carbon or methane or nitrogen or these different kind of assets as commodities, and you can start to treat them as that from like a more financial perspective, so that you can start to invest in carbon assets or like environmental assets to incentivize the addressing these problems at a larger scale. Because there's a lot of different pieces to doing this right. One, you have to have a level of transparency to where governments are like, okay, we get what's going on and we like this and we can see it and we can verify it. So permissionless data is a really good thing for them. But then the automation and the smart contracts start to click with them, because look, you're taking it from the bottom up. You're making a 2-year process into sometimes a 4 to 6 week process. So you're making it a lot faster. You're helping them address these big government problems, also addressing business models. And then you're starting to tie in the financial markets by figuring out how this exchange and these carbon registries can start to work together and standardize. So it's a really big problem with a lot of moving pieces, but
yeah, and at the same time, you're bringing transparency to the entire process, because it's auditable the entire way, and
exactly,
and which is not and that condition does not exist prior to this, right? I mean, the climate, the whole aspect of this is everybody's knows that it feels shady, a lot of it, right? So this
I mean, you see greenwashing articles like every week.
Exactly.
And then there was one that came out like 2 weeks ago that said only 1% of audits and carbon credits that have been issued have been proven to be anywhere near like 50% level of accuracy. So there's just a huge issue with like verifiability, any degree of accuracy, and then having transparency, because these audits happen and then it takes 2 years to actually go through the process and issue the credits. And then after the credits, there's a secondary audit that comes from like the scope 2 or scope 3 emissions. And you find out that the initial audit like missed 67 different data points, and it happened 3 years ago, and they were
actually counting on it, knowing that like they won't be there 3 years later and nobody will catch it, right? Or when they do, it's already gone. It's way too late to do anything about it. So
yeah. And this can go into anything. Like we're testing it with industrial facilities, but it can go into smart cities. You can take a LEED certification and create a real-time certification based on a building's emissions. You can implement sensors on a highway and say, what are the carbon emissions of this highway, and how do I put solar or wind power into my city to offset the emissions that the vehicles are producing? There's 1,000 different methodologies, and anything that you can think of that could say, this is the energy that's produced, or these are the emissions that's produced, and this is how we can address it. If you can measure how to do that, you can report it, you can verify it, and it can go into carbon markets.
Yeah, the whole key is auditable, transparent, measurements that can then be shared and leveraged monetarily. That's really what it
You
is.
have to probably audit that constantly on a regular basis. Otherwise, it's just ripe for fraud.
Oh yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the Avarium thing too, right? Which is the beauty of that is that frequency of auditing, but it's also
it's real time auditing at this point.
yeah,
So like
real time
with the
auditing, but
DMR
also
platform, we have a flagging system that we're putting in on this current iteration that we're going to be presenting next month. So where if there's any hiccups in the data, and like if there's things that come outside of predetermined ranges, or if sensors get disconnected, or any of this kind of stuff,
or a
you know,
faulty sensor or whatever, right? Yeah.
yeah, so then you can say, well, hey, this is it, but there's a gap in your data here, and you need to fix this, and it gives people incentives to actually, you know, keep sensors updated and keep things like up to date for the most part. So you can hold them accountable in real time instead of like 3 years later.
And does this also include then, you mentioned different methodologies, right? And you need also the data standards and the semantics, right? So I guess when we talk about digital MRV, there's a portion of that. So we not only secure the data and make it verifiable and immutable, but there's also in the solution a set of, what is the meaning of this data and how does it translate into carbon or other SDG related metrics, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with gold standard, we're starting to tie directly in like SDG impact verification and that kind of stuff too. But yeah, so Tom Bauman, he is the CEO of Climate Check. He was the original author of most of the standards around like climate data and emissions verification and that kind of stuff 25 years ago. So he's literally helped create this industry since the 90s, and has helped us transition what used to be those physical and manual auditing processes and data points into a digital structure, all built directly into how IOTA can operate.
Well, you're just bringing up a lot of stuff that I used to do a lot of, and you're just making me think about what we could do with PAN and with Armis, because both of them, like Armis as open source, they have the largest body of work, the collection of device profiles for around the world of all sensors, factory floors, whatever they may be. They have the exact profile. Not only do they look at do they understand the profile of the device, the latest update, you know, aside from just the basic measurements and the addresses of them, but you can also do things like, does it have the latest vulnerability updates? What's the behavior of that device? How many different protocols can it support? Is it doing something that is abnormal from its normal behavior? All that kind of stuff is monitored, and this would actually dovetail so well into what you're doing with the Alvarium stuff. It seems like a natural.
Oh yeah, and the Alvarium stuff is looking for those kind of like annotations as well.
Right.
So it's taking like, you know, is this device encrypted? Is it up to date? What's the percentage of like possibility for vulnerabilities in this existing device or system or what have you? And it's reporting on that with annotations in the Alvarium framework, and we're actually scoring the emissions that are coming out of a facility based on how digital it is, how much room there is for error. So if there's 7 manual data points and 2 automated ones, then the confidence score is going to be like 30%. But if it's 100% automated sensor-based data streams, then it's going to be probably closer to 70%. And then if everything's encrypted, all the devices are up to date, and you have good operational management of your facility, then you can get into the 90 to 100% range. And the crazy thing that people are really excited about with the Alvarium stuff is when you can quantify the level of confidence you have in the data at that granular of a level, then you can also change the value of the carbon credits based on that confidence score. So if they report this and they're pulling all these data streams and we're like, this is what we think our emissions reductions are, then you're like, okay, we'll give you, you know, $10 per ton of carbon reduction based on your 30% confidence score. But if it's a 95% confidence score, we'll give you $28 per ton of carbon reduction. So there's actually incentive to take care of your facilities and keep things up to date too.
That is very interesting to me. Does that condition exist now, or is that a business proposal by the Avarium Group? Because that sounds like something I would think of. Yeah. Because right now I assume it's just like a credit's a credit. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So right now a credit's a credit, right? And now what you're doing is they're able to introduce, okay, no, it's not one size fits all. There's actually the ability to determine whether how true is the data, and how
and
dependable is the data, and the more trustworthy, the more expensive it should be.
and this gives operators leverage too. So if they're like,
Yeah,
hey, we want to
sure.
put in this landfill gas like methane capture facility, and they're like, okay, we'll do it as cheap as possible. Then they're like, well, no, we don't want to do it as cheap as possible, because if we put in up to this level, then you can get your ROI, because we're going to be able to get this level of carbon credit reimbursement based on the
Oh yeah.
confidence we can provide. So it gives a whole financial conversation and like some leverage to the operators. And so they don't need to understand the technology. They just need to understand that they're delivering a better product, and they're solving a problem more efficiently.
Yeah, sold.
I didn't get the answer to what you asked, and then you were both talking, like you were saying, "Hey, so is this whatever baked in? Is it ready? Something like this." Man, you asked something, and then Matt answered. I couldn't really get the
Okay,
answer.
so I'll try to repeat. Like, if I think I understand your question, you were asking, so Matt was speaking about the different ways that you can confirm the validity of the data coming from the sensors. So the idea is the more data, the more accurate the data, potentially the more you should be able to charge for that data. So, right. So the idea is now it's kind of like people just submit data, and that's accepted as at one monetary value for that credit, that carbon credit, because there's no differentiation between a good, bad, or best a data submission, right? So it's just a credit is a credit. What the Avarium team is proposing, as I understand it, is a way to say, hey, look, all things are not equal. We provide opportunities and samplings that can provide you better fidelity about the data that's submitted. So we should be able to charge. They're introducing the concept that you should be able to charge different levels or receive more credit based upon the level of accuracy that you are saying that you have achieved. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, you can earn more based on the
Right.
level of confidence or the level of accuracy you have in data.
Is that did I answer what you wanted, Alex?
I guess that was it. Yeah,
Okay, cool.
And just another point on that too is like the methodologies, at least on the platform that we have now, you can actually go through and you can like see the data that comes in. You can select the individual sensors and look at the data streams from each sensor. It's all encapsulated in streams and structured out using the streams framework. And then the calculations are also in the platform, so you can see, well, these two streams come together and they're run through this calculation, and then that calculation also connects to these other streams, and this is how we get this metric. So all the math is completely transparent as well.
It'd be fun to go into like that situation and just say, now let's see what the other guys do. Show me the next guy in line. Yeah, exactly. It'd be like, yeah, it's just easy to separate, Yeah, it'd be fun.
Yeah. We haven't seen anything that does anywhere near what this is showcasing. So there's a lot of excitement and support around it.
Completely, I see why. Anybody else have some questions for Matt? I mean, this is fun stuff for me. Anybody else?
Hey Matt, and in your discussions with the members and the partners and working with this, has anyone actually experienced sort of working with another project that was a DLT but didn't work because it couldn't scale or fees or anything like that? Out of curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tom, the CEO of Climate Check, he was the co-chair for the climate working group for Hyperledger. He was also he also is the co-founder of the Climate Chain Coalition, so he's seen pretty much every other protocol in the space, and has like done comparisons internally on like how they do and what their approach is versus ours. So we have a lot of clarity around like what's happening with DLT in the space, and then how we're different. And then we're getting a lot of really positive feedback because a lot of the initial feedback was like, oh, we saw this, but it's on Ethereum, so there's these huge carbon emission questions that we have. So how can you solve a climate problem with something that is also a climate problem? And so when right, and so then when we say, well, here's our energy benchmarking, you can issue 20,000 data points from a facility for the same amount of electricity it costs you to brew a cup of coffee with a K cup or a Keurig. Then their eyes get really wide and they're like, wow, we've never seen anything that was able to perform this level of computation and data transparency with such a small footprint. And on top of that, we're already getting benchmarks on the next phase with Stardust and the network progressions that we're seeing, and it's at least 10 times more efficient than it already is.
That's awesome, because I was going to ask that, is if you guys have any data coming back from the new implementations of Stardust and SC. So that's awesome to hear that that's even more efficient.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of internal benchmarking. I'm hoping that we can publish that in like the coming weeks, but we want to make sure it's really thoroughly reviewed and we're putting data out there that's accurate. And then once Stardust and Skimmer go live, then we want to get the external audits done. It's just kind of silly to pay for an external audit if things are still progressing on a technology level.
That is really
awesome. That's awesome.
Really, it is really. I could just see a million ways of selling this. Just a million ways.
Yeah, it can go on anything. Like
yeah.
There's a thousand different ways to calculate emissions reductions and 1,000 different ways to start to implement IOTA for this industry to provide complete trust and accountability in the climate space. So.
Yeah, you have a target-rich environment. The hardest part is probably deciding which targets, right? Where you should spend your most time, because everything's a target, and every like literally every business is a sale. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like it's overwhelming, like the amount of demand we've seen with this. We probably have at least a dozen other pilots already like on the plan or in conversation, getting finalized with a ton of big partners, a ton of like Dell-sized partners as well that want to implement this at scale or start to pilot it and then scale it up. We've had conversations about it and sustainable supply chain tracking. It also goes into GTSC and what Jens and them are doing with Zebra. It also comes into the stuff we've been doing with TM Forum. So it's actually a really good connector too into the other verticals that we have, so that we can have this like really sustainably focused ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, this could be an IOTA Trojan horse, right? Really.
Can you say anything about the model? Because Greg wants to already sell it now, in terms of how you can actually boil that ocean and work with partners. What's like the business model of Climate Check? Are they like a consulting firm or?
So Climate Check actually is in the auditing business. So they do audits for, I think they have over 100 different companies that they do these types of audits for. So they have a lot of demand just in the auditing side, and this is helping them scale their business model. And then with the Google and Gold Standard funding and relationships that we're establishing there, the amazing thing about this is, just as easy as someone can submit like a new smart contract on Ethereum, you could submit a new methodology on IOTA for scaling out carbon markets. So the ability to have an open ecosystem with open APIs and a permissionless network that it all points to, it helps us take all these different methodologies and these different ecosystems and say, we don't need to own all of this. This is something where everyone can take their piece that is related to their experience or the industry, start to shift it into a sustainable focus, and then scale it out in their existing markets.
For example, there would be something for, let's say, agriculture and food, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it can also, the same exact process can go into organic food certification or sustainable fishing. Like there's methodologies that say this is how we classify sustainable fishing. You can take this Climate Check, IOTA, like DMRV kind of structure and bring it into that kind of certification model as well. Create near real-time certifications, automate the auditing, go completely upstream like we are, and then start to connect the markets. So there's just a high level of transparency and trust in everything that's out there now.
Yeah, I can go anywhere. Anybody who makes anything that produces emissions. And you could even go to like you could use it for you know, farming, cattle raising, cows.
How do you capture the air quality of like
or the methane, right, and all that? And
yeah, the methane emissions of cattle, and then how do you quantify that? And then what can the farmers actually do to offset the methane that they're emitting through cattle?
What about you put it on your car and you have your car sit in the garage so it doesn't produce any carbon?
And then at the same time, are you putting hooking a hose from your exhaust pipe into your window? Is that what you're doing? Or
no.
Let's not go in that direction, please.
Yeah, I was just
self-sovereign identity.
So is this and a big benefit is in the real-time auditing, like, because don't they, with oil and gas, like a lot of refineries, they have to maintain certain hazardous emissions under certain micron levels that they're exhausting, and I don't know how the government or what organizations they use to audit that, or what kind of sensors they audit, but I assume it'd probably be on like an interval basis rather than a real-time basis. But I could be totally wrong.
All of it's in a manual basis. They usually get an audit every 12 to 15 months. Someone has to fly over to their facilities with a clipboard and a tablet, take a bunch of notes, go through and run a bunch of calculations on spreadsheets, and then submit a report. And it takes 18 to 24 months for that report to be verified, reviewed, and then certified, so that people can either know they're doing bad and they need to change it, or they're doing good and they should be rewarded for it.
Yeah, I've actually been involved in three projects in oil and gas. Well, four. One in Montana, one in on the North Slopes in Alaska, around sensor data and sensor collection on the North Slope, and then Bakersfield, and all of them to a T. It's completely. You see people walk out in the field with a chart, walk up to the sensor, handwrite notes. It's now been advanced more. They're using readers and smartphones to take that data. But on the political side of things, and a lot of reasons, the oil companies and the refineries, they slow walk this data. They don't want it to come fast. So that's another thing. That's right.
And I think from the government standpoint, they're going to get way more hits above that accepted level that potentially they could put a fine on, but which would be a good thing, because it would say, hey, you guys might have certain flare-offs, and sorry, you got to change your processes so that doesn't happen. Whereas if it's an interval basis, they can say, all right, guys, let's keep everything down.
Yeah, you got it.
Out. We don't want any flare-offs while the auditors.
And by the way, the guy who comes here every quarter is going to show up next week. So let's just make sure it's under control during that time. Yeah, you bet that happens.
And I mean, the other thing with that is, like, a lot of them are understand they need to make better processes, but they don't want to put $10 million into fixing a problem and then it not actually fix the problem. So they don't want to find out 2 years later that they're getting fined $100 million for something that they thought they were fixing and then they ended up not fixing. So this can actually help them as well, because you're saying, look, this is where your problem is. If you put this amount of money into it and you talk to investors or your shareholders or whatever, and you start to solve it now, you can avoid the fines, you can maintain compliance, and then you can actually say, look, we're doing everything we can and it's completely above board. So in some perspectives, yeah, they want to slow walk it because they know something's going to come that they weren't expecting. They're going to get a $10 million fine, and they're going to have to invest in it. And by the time they put that money into it 3 years after the initial audit, then it's no longer relevant.
And also, our regulators are pretty good at seesawing action, right? So, hey, this is where we're going, and all of a sudden, oh no, we decided we're not going to do that direction, or we're not going to be as stringent. Or they kind of just, not intentionally, but they end up misleading, companies and pointing everybody in this way in a direction, and then all of a sudden they do a reverse pivot, and it's kind of like, well, what about all the stuff that we've been working on for the last 3 years? And then just go, hey, well, sorry, man, we're on something new.
Not good enough. Do more.
Yeah, Pretty much.
The data quality, verifiability aspect. Actually, think about, let's say, tokenomics, if you wish, of the timeliness, right, of the data. So how can you create pressure so that, maybe they pay emission taxes upfront, and if they can measure in real time, they can avoid capital outlays or something like that, right? To make them to real-time reporting faster. This could be very interesting also to explore, I guess.
You could also possibly do an
essentially-
escrow system.
Yeah, so you could essentially say like, hey, this is the fine that you're going to be get because this is the data we're seeing. But if you proactively address the problem, then you're not going to get fined, and you can save money by also investing in the thing that's, the problem up front instead of finding out 2 years later.
And that's also when you have device makers that actually integrate this stuff into their solutions, right? I mean, this is something that Germany is doing very well, right? Maybe it's to go to Germany more often, right? But they like insulating houses and emissions for HVAC systems and so on, yeah? Which constantly create new markets for folks, yeah? They can sell new heating systems and new windows and God knows what, right? And keep the craftsmen busy, yeah? And it's a form of subsidy, but one that is in some way positive. And helping.
It's got potential to be a big job and ecosystem revenue generator for a ton of different parties. So it really is like a rising tide raises all ships situation in that context.
Hey, you guys, there's been somebody else. Was it Greg at DataGovs, or were you trying to get in? Or who was trying to ask a question?
I was trying to ask a quick question.
Yeah, go for it, man. Sorry.
Hey, Matt, Greg here. So my question is just more around adoption. So for us, what we see is we're connecting and processing a ton of sensor data for governments, for enterprises, you name it, from oil and gas. But my question is more towards like for IOTA and climate check, how do you perceive adoption of this? Because one of the problems we see is, we can connect different IoT sensors. There's a lot of solutions out there, but generally presenting solutions like IOTA tend to get a lot of pushback. And we know like here, folks that hold it, IOTA is wonderful, but how do we get more of like this real world adoption? And what do you see as some of the levers to do that?
Yeah, I mean, talking about it before building is difficult, but since we have a platform that we can actually like walk them through, and we can show them the different data points and where the transparency comes in, and answer the questions really concretely at a low level, it seems to really help the adoption conversation. So
in that, and I don't know, but does the IF kind of offer that? Okay, so DataGov has, let's say, there's some sort of threshold, like, just to conserve time from the IF's personnel and yourself, like the organization or corporation or business would have to be so big. Okay, if that organization or government or whatever business is bigger than that, then what is the project? And then maybe the IF say, hey, we can get Matt to spend an hour and kind of show. So then all of a sudden the credibility comes in where you go, hey, we're working with climate check, we're working with Dell, we're doing this, and yes, this stuff isn't necessarily public. It's there, it's working, and we have some test cases going. We're running efficiencies, we're 10% more efficient even with the new smart contract implementation, et cetera, et cetera. Like, could the IF offer that to support ecosystem projects with credibility support?
Yeah, so that's been a big conversation in how market adoption is evolving, because a lot of what we're trying to do moving forward is like not do all of this ourselves, because we know we're a bottleneck with this kind of stuff. But now that we have produced the kind of things with like Zebra technologies and the Dell relationships and DMRV and all the stuff that Michaela's working on with infrastructure and telco, we have enough there to be able to say, oh, well, we can show you a platform that addresses the problem that you're talking about. And we want to start to hand as much of that off to the community as possible, so that we can help de-risk building companies first off, because we know like getting projects and having credibility or having like leverage in those conversations and getting through that trust conversation up front is really difficult. But we want to take that kind of structure and figure out if that's what it takes. Like, you know, me coming into a call for 30 minutes to help you land a project, we want to be able to figure out how we can do that and how we can scale that. But we also need to be careful because we don't want to be seen as picking favorites. So, I mean, I think that's something we would really appreciate a lot of feedback on is how can I come into your partner conversations, and I'm not trying to capture your partners. I want you to capture your partners. I want you to get revenue. But how can I spend, 30 minutes or 45 minutes, jump into a call with you and, this mayor or this CXO or what have you, and say, this is how we know it works, and these are other points and case studies and or what have you that we can showcase that show how it works, and these are other partners that are, adopting it and acknowledging that it does do what needs to be done to address these kind of problems.
Yeah, it'd be nice if there was some sort of way to filter out, like you said, like someone maybe just gets the secretary and gets the meeting, with someone big, and then says, "Oh, I want to bring in the IF." It's like, well, wait a, this is more for you've already met that person, you've already given your proof of concept, you have a relationship built, and they're interested. They just need to see that it's actually working in other ecosystems, and that it is working. And but yeah, how do you kind of create that filter system, or else that it's just a time waste?
Yeah, but yeah, I agree with that, what you said. But of course, then also once this is ready for prime time, you just also need to enable the partners with, good material and so on to create air cover and give them assets that they can use to get the party started. Yeah, and then initially, yes, you may have to help from the IOTA Foundation to push somebody over the edge until you get the momentum, right? But yeah, this marketing awareness and marketing assets is also, I think, a big part of it in order to help the partners get the engagement and work with the different customers and partners.
Yeah, and thanks, Matt. I appreciate your feedback there. I think for us, what we see typically on our end is not like getting the customer, or the partner, or the project in terms of walking them through a solution. We're actually a Zebra ISV company, so we're really happy about that relationship with IOTA. What we see often is the challenge in the sustainability rooms talking about climate change is often this isn't even on the mind. So it's like you show them solution and say, hey, by the way, you could do this with this other thing, and it's called IOTA. And they say, okay, that's cool, but let's do it with this other thing. So one of the things that we see as we kind of build in the ecosystem is just that area of trust, especially getting business adoption. So this is companies 8, 9 figures. These are some of the barriers we see.
Yeah, I completely get that. And a lot of time is like, if you haven't dealt with the technology to the degree I have and worked on as many projects as I have with it, it's hard to know how to position it in those conversations, because I've seen it and shown it and know the differences and how we do things and the benefits of permissionless or transparency or feeless or these different unique selling points that IOTA as the technology has versus a more centralized solution or another DLT based solution. So I'm good at going on to those conversations and saying, oh, well, this is how they work. I understand it to a degree of technical depth to know how their solutions actually function. And then this is what we do different, and this is why we do it different. So being able to bring it down to that level of simplicity takes time to understand how to do that. But I guess it's difficult to do, but it is doable, and we see it as well pretty frequently.
So Greg, I mean, I've made my entire career on getting around this objection with the startups I've been involved with. So I would just say that it would be really cool to maybe you bring forward some of the typical objections that you hear from these large enterprise accounts, and so we can start knocking them down with written responses, because they're all going to be the same. They're all going to you'll find out that they're going to be 20 of them. They're all going to have similar questions. They're going to be worded differently, but they're basically going to have fear, uncertainty, and doubt about certain areas. And so what we just do is we build a script for each one of those. And then you can then take that to them, kind of have that discussion with them. And then when they start getting to the point where they feel comfortable about, okay, this does seem interesting to me. I'd like to take another conversation. That's when I would think you would bring in somebody like Matt to help you get it over the line, because Matt's experience and so forth would do that. Because it's extending the conversation, coming back with answers that look like they're industry certified answers, industry respectable answers that aren't just sales guys speak, but come from, hey, no, there's a serious body of work that's been put behind this, the research and the methodology and how we got here, and our understanding of what really needs to take place with a permissionless scenario. To be able to understand the data being trusted from the edge all the way through, and to be able to quantify how the integrity of that data and our belief in it being close to 90 to plus accurate is something that's compelling, and you get that second conversation or third one, and bring Matt in, I would think would work.
I think one thing you said too, like if we could find a way to do like a community-driven business playbook, I think that would be a really good thing, just from like the community side to spearhead. And if we can figure out, like, what are the questions? How do your business conversations usually go? How can we provide our feedback on what we've seen? Because I've talked to probably 1,500 different companies about this stuff over the last 3.5 years. So like, I want to be able to take everything I've learned and bring it out to y'all as easily as possible, so you're prepared when those kind of like confrontations or questions come, and you already know, like, this is probably going to come, and this is what seems to get a good response for it, or what have you. So if we can figure out a way to drive that from the community, and we as the foundation can like just feed everything that we've done over the last 4 years with all the different relationships we've had into it, I think that would be an awesome asset to create for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, one of the easy questions that I know right off the bat are going to be, okay, these are the systems that we use today to control control our networks and control our devices. How would you interface with those? And how difficult are they? Completely separate? What does that look like for me? And that will be question number one at every one of these calls.
Yeah, I would also say, like, there are some things like how long it takes to implement it, just because one of the things that keeps on coming up whenever we have discussion regarding technologies is bandwidth, right? They, like, most big companies have way too small of an IT team to handle their workload. So just having the bandwidth to get in there is the big issue. So if we can have an understanding of, like, oh, setting it up from start to finish is a 15-minute process across per sensor or something like that, I think there would be a lot of like scalable, sellable conversations we can have.
And the answer to that, right? The answer to that question is always going to have to be, depends on how ancient a critter you have as far as your sensor is, how well you've maintained those sensors, how outdated are they, how ancient they are they up to snuff, are they been patched, all those kinds of good things. That has to be answered first for you to actually give an acceptable, appropriate answer to that question.
Yeah, so
It'd be nice. It'd be
I would
nice.
say, sorry, I would say you can also focus on new deployment of technology
Okay,
versus
that's a different question, but yeah.
because that
It'd be
new territory it's like greenfield, and that's something that we could replicate across the
Yes,
system.
I agree with that for the most part. Yeah.
It'd be nice if there was a Discord channel that people could post these questions of, hey, had a meeting, got hit with this kind of killed it. And then maybe someone from the IF side kind of like categorize those, and like you said, 20 questions might be different, but they're really the same, and then can start coming up with those answers of people from the IF experience in those, and then eventually finding what really gets the people to understand to overcome that.
I think the idea of a channel is cool, except for the disorganization. It like might need to be something like a discourse or something, right? Yeah, because it's a zoo. Yeah.
The other thing is that you can do is you can then take those questions in a public forum and use, let's say, somebody from the content DAO to create kind of
Sure.
Visually good, like,
Compelling data.
Yeah, like account of the data and like good data sheets that can be like IF fun, not official IF kind of validated statements, so they have to be.
Exactly.
Yeah, IF and IF partner statements too. Like getting those kind of questions answered by VPs at Dell and Zebra and a lot of these other companies, I think is completely possible too. So we can
That
take their
is
feedback
actually,
and say, hey,
yeah, that will help
these
a
are questions
lot.
we're getting.
And the more wins that you get with the, well, when Dell and Zebra corporate wins, the more that they can, if they're able to communicate that, a lot of times you run into the things where you can't, corporations just won't let you use their name in advertising. But if you have a couple, you get lucky on a couple of them, right? And they can actually allow you to do a little bit of a story on them, and that can be brought forward. That'll help a lot.
Last question to Matt, and maybe this is for everybody else. Do you believe the community is ready for that? We've seen a lot of, it's interesting, an IO community compared to other communities, right? It's like typical communities, you build on something, you say, hey, we have this thing, facing this challenge. And typically we see is like the builders of it, like the G-Man who's built like a Suniverse or somebody else that has built like a project kind of come in and say, here's some ways. But like somebody's mentioned, maybe a discourse to be better, but we haven't kind of seen that. I mean, IF has been great, but it's been a lot of like, okay, that's great. Like, glad to see you're trying to work on getting this, big company to use IOTA. IF should be doing that. And it's like, yeah, that's great that IF does stuff, but there's so many stuff that we as organizations and people can build on top to add so much value. So do you think the community is ready for that type of questions of saying, hey, streams may be good for this, but this other project on IOTA may not be ready yet?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, go ahead, Greg.
I would say that a community is a community, right? You have people that do, people that don't, and people that are naysayers. You got a mix of people. And all you can do is you present the information and the game plan the best you can, and those that are willing participants will seize the ball and run with it. So saying is a community ready for it? I don't think that's the right thing. I think the question is, have we put them in a position for them to be able to see the light and actually kind of run with it? So I don't think we've done a really great job at that. So I think that's something that we could do a better job at doing. But it's you do have to lead them along a little bit to show them the way forward, because a lot of people want to do stuff, but they don't know the path. So if you can show them the path and maybe show them a repeatable process, they can duplicate that, and then you might see them run. So that's my 2 cents.
Hey, Matt, I got a question, different question. So you had said 90% of your time is with climate change. I was kind of hoping I'd hear like 60% and then 30% Jaguar. Just wondering when this pivoted there.
Yeah, so the mobility relationships have gotten to a point where we've been able to start getting more hands off with them. And mobility and OEMs move at a different pace than what we're seeing in the climate space right now. So the pace of evolution with the climate technologies is able to keep up with the pace of evolution of blockchain and the conversations in blockchain in general, whereas the OEM conversations are much, much slower. And it takes a lot more to move those internal gears there. But we do still have good relationship with JLR. We do still have good relationships with other OEMs. They've been doing their own internal developments as well. So I'm hoping that they're getting to a point where they're going to be able to start talking about that a little more publicly. But we've noticed as well with OEMs specifically, it's really difficult to get them to take the steps forward and like have more public conversations, because it's just such a hyper competitive space. But I mean, I was just in Mexico City with the Jaguar team like 3 weeks ago, and we had some really great conversations, like directly with the board of directors there, with leadership from the Jaguar Racing side and the JLR side. There's a lot going on internally. They've got internal engineering teams that they've been getting upskilled to understand IOTA and start to plan out the roadmaps to scale things out. And it's not just JLR. JLR is just the most public one, but there are other OEMs that have made a lot of substantial progress over the last year. It's just that we we can't push them to be public about things, and that's become kind of a barrier to being able to say like, look, this is what's coming, because they don't want to, they don't want to have those conversations publicly and then risk any competitive advantage that they're going to be able to retain and stuff. So it's just a much heavier space to work in. So because the sustainability stuff is moving so quickly, and there's so many people coming in saying we need a solution to this problem, and you're the only thing that we can see solving it. And honestly, I think the scale is a lot bigger as well. We've been able to progress things much more quickly and much more publicly in that space.
Yeah,
I appreciate that.
It's pretty clear. I mean, when you work with manufacturers like this, it takes so long for a model to like how long it takes to just gen up one model in one generation of a car is just,
like the cars that come out this
yeah.
year, they designed 5 years ago.
Right, exactly. And so go ahead.
No, I mean, I was going to shift back to the climate. I want to keep switching around, but no, I just, I mean, I think that answered a hell of a lot for all of us. On the climate change, back to the climate change, do you feel that the momentum you've said has occurred over the last year? Is any of that, I mean, I'm sure a part of it is political. Is a lot of it political? Like, let's say all of a sudden Trump gets back into presidency on the next round. Do you feel like some of these companies would then all of a sudden cut these projects down or not focus on them
at all,
as
because
much?
These are global conversations. They're not constrained to like one political environment, which I think is part of the good part. They're completely globalized conversations, and everyone understands it's a global problem, and they have the ability to implement it where the political environment is friendly in an easier fashion than some of like the OEM type of conversations. Because there's so many more stakeholders with these connected vehicle and autonomous vehicle solutions and everything. But with climate, it's something that like all the infrastructure is there, and it's looking to be digitized and have these kind of solutions scaled out to it. And if the regulatory environment is better in South Africa than it is in Argentina, then the Canadian government talks to the South African government and they say, hey, we want to try these out and pilot it and see if we can scale this out in your country. So it's a much easier conversation to have that way. And so there is like the government backing and having essentially the EPA of Canada supporting us in these conversations, and the Ministry of Environment in Chile, and the European Union and Commission and others come in and say, no, this is why we like this and we actually support this. The government backing provides a lot of like de-risking to it, but then just like the efficiency and the light touch of it all also helps people say, oh, well, there's not a lot of financial risk, there's not a lot of IP risk. The risk is really minimal, so they can scale these out and test them much more flexibly.
And it's an play in a green field, right? And even though work with gold standard, in many ways this underlying infrastructure could, of course, and should empower all sorts of different standardization efforts and programs, right? But it's really generic, and there's no legacy, which is very much compared to the automotive space a great plus, right? Because and efficiency. So
so hey, I do have to jump off before my wife stabs me.
I was gonna say it's late for you and for a few people, but Matt, if you need to take off, go ahead. For those who want to stay with us, we do have. I think you can do it in quick order here, but Deep Sea JD can give us a quick overview on what we're doing in the governance stuff for what we hope to happen after the build versus burn vote. So
great stuff, Matt. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. That was awesome. Matt. Really enjoyable conversation.
All right, thanks, Joe.
All right, have a good day.
Have a good one.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Oh man, all right. That was impressive to hear him. He's so good. I can't wait till he goes on Sooniverse. I mean, not Sooniverse, the podcast. Monaco podcast.
Cool. He could talk for a long time, and he's just smooth. He knows his stuff.
Yeah. Well, cool. I'll just jump in and give a recap of the speed fund, and appreciate asking to do that. Again, we're just trying to get the communication out to everyone. if anyone doesn't know, the background is, let's say we vote build. It's going to take some time to build this Treasury DAO with smart contracts and voting system. It's not essentially vote, build, and start funding projects to expand the ecosystem. So, and as we know, we're doing something awesome to where we get to do it in a decentralized way through the community, but that the negative effect is it's going to take longer. So some people have, kind of expressed like, man, it would be so nice to start getting some funds from that 50 Ti or whatever 65 Ti Treasury fund in the interim time. So let's say 1 year to 18 months it takes to build this Treasury DAO, can in any way, with the support of the community, let's say we do the same type of vote that's burn or build, but it's such as the second vote comes up, hey, our idea is we want to take 10 Ti or 5 Ti, and maybe that's a vote, and the community can vote, hey, let's do 5 Ti, okay, so be it. And we're going to use a committee selected by the community to then take proposals from outside projects and potentially either from a very technical, specific selected committee of, subject matter experts that can really dive in and see, hey, this is a good project, this is a bad project, et cetera, and then choose the projects. Or another option could be this selected delegated committee then vets the project and just puts the data and the information together and presents it to the community to say, let's fund these 5 projects with that 5 TI, et cetera. So we've been discussing this, and we've had some internal kind of voice channels about, do we have to build the whole process? Because that's going to take time. And the focus is speed. The focus is, we vote build, hopefully within a couple months, we can start funding projects. Well, we talked about that. One, we have the EDF, which not only has some good processes, WAGMI DAO has done some excellent work on that, getting some processes about vetting projects, creating milestones, making sure that if it is a scam project, it's catched in milestone 1 and you don't give them the full funding amount. And then also, who can be the third party that handles these funds? And the EDF does it with dang it, what do you call it? The third party that handles the crypto funds.
Oh, like a custody provider. So it would be in this case, it is
right.
Crypto Finance AG. So
yes, Crypto Finance AG. They already do that for EDF. It's not the IF holding those funds that then release it to projects which the EDF approves. It's Crypto Finance AG, this custody provider. So they already know IOTA, they already know Tangle, they already know the wallet, they can already do multi-sig, et cetera, et cetera. So we can tap into that, and we can use the EDF as a consultant and then work with Crypto Finance AG. So that covers what I would think is such a big headache of, well, how do we make sure no one can kind of steal these funds, right? How would that happen? It would be just node owners. If the community agreed and voted upon it, the node owners would then transfer that TI to the Finance AG. And then we would have this proposal process, which the community is doing. The community is taking that action to support and either delegate a team or do the final choice of, hey, let's fund these 5 projects and we're going to do a 5 milestone and et cetera. They got to meet those milestones with those deliverables. Furthermore, if let's say we do finish the Treasury DAO in 9 months and we're just rocking and rolling, the community's kicking ass, and 5 projects have been approved and 4 on milestone 1 and 1 is on milestone 3, well, those projects will then, and it will be somehow written in there that they will then be taken over by the Treasury DAO governance when that is ready. So it's an interim kind of method to take a little bit of that and really start getting some projects that can really expand the ecosystem. Because I think there's just some great stuff out there that just needs a little seed money to get things going. So since then, our last meeting, we've kind of talked about who would want to be active. I mean, it's again, anyone that's involved in the DAOs. It's a lot of work. A lot of us are working, but it really takes certain people that are either extremely passionate or,
Committed.
semi-retired or
Totally
committed.
committed.
Absolutely. That can really spend the time, not just come into the meeting, but then go off and do action. So we came out with 6 bullet points of what would kind of be action items to start building this, just an initial kind of inertia to get some momentum going, and who would really want to dive deep and start getting in on this and spending 4 to 20 hours a week of doing the research, writing up the statements and writing up the communication that we would then work with the community. And but again, the point is that it's all backed by the community. If it's not accepted by the community, it wouldn't go, but we at least got to try, I think. So if there's anyone in this group or the Treasury Governance group that hasn't seen the thread, please check out the Bridge Committee channel, and you can kind of see the summary of our latest meeting. And then if you really do want to commit that time and really take action, please feel free. And we're deciding on, is that team going to be 6 or 10, how that goes. So yeah, anyone got any questions?
I would just add that we want to keep that committee kind of small, right? Because it's all about speed. I kind of titled this as the speed committee, and that's because, and in order to be faster, we need to kind of keep the group to a smaller core so that we can execute. Because this whole governance process, right, is we have, when we hit May, we will have been discussing this vote for a year. So, we're trying to get around that. We involved the entire community, and that makes decision-making slow. So this whole speed aspect is I'm just stressing. So we want to keep the group small. I'm sorry I interrupted somebody. So
yeah, it was me, Greg. So this is Andy. I have already reached out to a few law firms. Paul Hastings is one of them, and the other one is Deveroy's, to potentially help and basically help in twofold, both as the lawyers to help us make sure that we're doing it correctly and we can go as fast as we can possibly, but on the other end work as kind of lobbyists on kind of our behalf in case there are kind of IOTA specific crypto regarding laws aspects that we want to get addressed in a with the support of a massive law firm.
right, to support to protect our assets.
That's great. Focus on the assets.
Exactly.
At Deveroy's, the partner said she is looking to get kind of put together a team and help.
Nice.
So we'll see how that turns out. But yeah, just wanted to say.
So I don't know if we really stress this enough, JD, but we are looking to execute on the speed team with speed, so quickly, and we want to be able to have a decision on this, on who wants to be the core team. The 6, 7, or whatever the number is, on next Wednesday. So we're not trying to we are executing. We're moving fast, and if by next Wednesday we get let's say 20 people throw their names into the hat, then we'll have a vote, and it'll the nature of the vote will probably be one which will be within Discord or something of that nature, but it very possibly can happen and will happen on Wednesday. So our intent is just like no reason to dilly-dally. Let's get going. So.
Yeah, and the people that have already been active, I mean, they want to get going now, but we don't want to necessarily do anything until everyone has the opportunity to get involved. And then, side note is that we plan to try to do this again, we want to keep it, like Greg said, like small, to focus on speed and execution. One of a good way to do that is to have almost like the developer channels in IF, where anyone can read but only those members of that committee can type. We'll still have an open channel that anyone can type and say, hey guys, I saw you reading this, but have you thought of this, et cetera, et cetera. But, everything, of course, is going to be done in a fully transparent way with the community. But yeah, I mean, hopefully next week we lock these people in, we get the team going. Dumb Dave already came out with some great bullet points to really get going and taking some action on thing. And I think those people in those group are just going to say, hey, I want to take task 1, I'll take task 2, and we're going to start cracking
and
on with it.
and running. And I would say that the intent of this group, right, is already been explained by JD, but we're going to have the build versus burn vote. But the very next vote will be hopefully the things that will be to employ this group to be able to kind of use the recommendations that have been compiled and put together in preparation for that time. So that will hopefully be the next vote to say, hey, look, all right, build. It's a build. We have a treasury. Now let's kind of start issuing money, and here's the plan, and let's put things into action. So our whole aim here is to make sure that when the build vote comes in positive, that we don't just start on that day saying, hey, we got to build a plan. We'll already have a plan ready to start to execute upon, and we don't start from a dead stop.
And I think it's a great opportunity above all that too, not only to support the growth of the ecosystem, but also that we get to kind of try some things with just a small portion of the treasury fund rather than having it all. We get to try committees, we get to try delegates, we get to figure out test out proposal filtering to filter out spam, and how proposal milestones are then followed up and deliverables provided, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it's a great little test case in a sense that the main treasury governance group that is building the DAO can go, wow, that really shit the bed with that one. Let's kind of learn from that. Or hey, that worked really, really good. Let's take that and go with that and incorporate that. So I think it's, not just that we're going to help grow the ecosystem by funding some projects, but really test out some things in a little test field with a little bit of actual value. And that can then support the growth of the main Treasury DAO governance and really kind of rather than putting those 65 TI all at once at risk there.
Okay, so we're getting close to I think we've had a nice long meeting. It's been a great one, but I want to make sure that we give an opportunity for any questions about what we just discussed. Anybody have any questions about what JD's had to say?
I'm just out of curiosity, does anyone think it's a bad idea to do some type of speed funding, interim funding in our situation? Okay.
I mean,
guess not.
I think that getting to a position where you can fund as soon as possible, as soon stuff is ready, of course,
yeah,
is I would say important, right? And it seems like it might take longer than we want if you don't go forward with partly funding, right? That's what I. So
yeah,
I think
that's clear as day.
Yeah. I mean, we've waited a year just to get to this point.
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
A year to who knows what, before we could actually proper treasury governance DAO.
You're kind of building the social structure for it to happen before the technical is ready, which is fine, because why wait till the technical is ending before you say, okay, now we talk how we make the social structure. Hey, we can start building it now.
Yeah, you got it, because it's got to happen anyhow, right? So why not do it now? Right. So
cool.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm sure, like most of you, you guys are all about you're crying uncle right now. An hour and a half's a good amount of time. I appreciate y'all sitting